advocates have to do a couple of things. One, you absolutely have to instill hope. And hope is not the same as optimism. Those are two separate things. One is it will work out. Hope is we can make this work out. And the important part of that is the agency. There are things we can do. And that's a super important thing for us to always be saying. The other thing is we have to be very focused on the decline of trust. That actually hurts public interest more than any other side, a decline of trust. And so we ourselves have to do very trustworthy communication. So we have to be careful about the hyperbole and the things that might really help with the algorithms. But if they decline trust even further, you're basically just digging a gigantic hole. So we have to be figuring out ways to be communicating in ways that actually build trust.
Welcome to Season 2 of The Campaign Strategist, where we dive into the art and science of advocacy campaigns with the people who design and execute them, unpacking how they think, how they plan, and how they win. I'm your host, Pete Altman. Today's guest is Kristen Grimm, founder of Spitfire Strategies, a public interest firm focused on advancing racial, economic, and social justice, protecting the environment, and promoting opportunity for all. Kristen has extensive experience running smart communication and campaign efforts that create lasting social change. They recently released a campaign planning guide called Planning to Win, How to Post Wins in Challenging Times, which lays out a clear, disciplined framework for designing campaigns that actually achieve concrete victories. If you want to know more about how to build a winning approach into your campaign from the very start, this episode is for you. Before we dive in, if you find conversations like this useful, please like, share, and subscribe. It really helps more people find the show and learn from great practitioners. And I'd also love to hear from you. Drop a comment. Let me know if you have suggestions for people I should interview or what questions I should be asking. All right, let's get into it. Kristen, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining us. So I would love to hear a little bit about you and how you got into this line of work. Oh, we lost your sound.
Hear me now?
Now I can. Yep.
Yeah, so I'm an accidental advocate in many ways. I graduated college and I was definitely supposed to be going to law school. And I decided I was not ready to go to more school. And so I ended up in Washington, D.C. And the firm that I went to go work for was just finishing up Nelson Mandela's stadium tour. So I got to really understand what public interest communication was very early. And I was thinking about it as I was preparing for the show today. And I realized, too, that we were in the middle. One of the things I had to do as an assistant, a very low-level intern, was I had to track all of the Apple campaign litigation. And so you may remember back in the day, there used to be Alar, which was a horrible chemical, and it would go on apples to make them look redder, and it was very dangerous. And public interest groups like NRDC actually issued science that said this should be off the shelves. And they weren't waiting for the regulators. They took it to CBS News. 60 Minutes did it. I'm thinking about all the things that are happening with 60 Minutes right now. And it did get pulled off the shelf within a matter of days. It really showed the power of being able to get information to an activated public and that you could get really big results. At the same time, we got sued, CBS got sued, NRDC got sued. And even though we ultimately won that case, it is also a good reminder that when you're going up against powerful interests, you can make a really huge difference. And you have to be ready for if there is going to be backlash. And I think it's an important thing to keep top of mind.
Excellent. And was there a particular moment when you realized that communication strategy and campaign strategy was what you were just really made for?
I would say I really decided to stay within the field. It was funny because when I first got there, Bill Clinton had come in. He was definitely, the youth vote was considered a really important part of his campaign strategy. And I was with a lot of young people who at the time had decided national service was really important. And they started big groups. This is Wendy Kopp from Teach for America. This is Vanessa Kirsch of Public Allies. They came up with whole new models, and they actually passed legislation around national service, which of course became AmeriCorps. And I think it was at that point that I realized, because even though at the time I had opportunities to go to the White House or I had opportunities to go work on the Hill, I really started to understand that this communication thing was a real power lever and it was going to get more important. I could just see that at the time, people were really outsourcing their communication. A firm would come in and we would do all the communication. And eventually they might have an intern who did their communication. And of course, over the time that I've been in public interest communication, this has gone all the way to the top that you would not be a public interest CEO these days without strong communication skills. And so I just really fell in love with it as a place where you could really make a really big difference if you understood how to wield power.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, we've just seen such extraordinary changes, even in the last few years, particularly in the role and the power of communications. What do you think about when you think about how things have changed and how we need to adapt going forward?
I am a person that is filled with hope. So even when there's crisis, I always see opportunities. And I see that the same here. So whereas I definitely worry about an information ecosystem that's so fractured, but at the same time, it's not like when Walter Cronkite told us what the news was, that everybody's voices were getting heard and certain narratives were told and other ones were ignored. So to me, having more information and having more channels, ultimately, if we end up doing this the right way, should actually end up with more perspectives, which will help us to do better meaning making in this time of we've had more information than we've ever had before. If you think about, we used to have to go to the library to look stuff up, and now every library is in your back pocket. And what does that do for people being curious and learning about things? And there's a lot of things that are back up for grabs about what does this mean? I recently wrote a blog because I read a great book called Don't Burn Anyone at the Stake Today. And it was a little bit about when we tend to get more information, we have unbelievably awful things happen like the Inquisition, and we have unbelievably great things that happen like the golden age of science. And I hope to steer this more in the golden age of science and a little out of the Inquisition. But I do think that right now there's a lot of things that we're trying to understand. What does this mean? And that is something we're always in search of. And an AI is not going to change that.
I just want to stay on the information environment that we're in. Yeah, it seemed like it held so much promise 2010, maybe up to 9 years ago. And then it feels like it just started to get really sour. It does align with the rise of Trump, not that he caused it, or although it may have contributed more to helping him ascend. But the information that's out there, it's overbalanced in terms of what causes strong emotional reactions, anger, frustration, hate, and the algorithms who just want you to stay on the site and keep clicking and keep scrolling. Look for that. It gets harder for sort of normal discourse or reasoned arguments to make their way to us, or that we really have to work to find that and get around all of the stuff that is just makes your vision go red instead. How are advocacy organizations, how should progressive groups be thinking about how to adapt their communication style to succeed in this environment?
They need to really consider their role in the world. I think sometimes people think, oh, because other people do all this like fear, shame, mongering, we are going to do it too. And the truth is, sometimes people come to me and they're like, let's do the campaign. I want to make people really mad about this. And I'm like, really? Do we need more anger? We have such a range of emotions. Let's get good at other kinds of emotions. And the truth is, for a lot of the stuff that we might want to get done for the collective public good, we actually need to combat the cynicism, the helplessness. A lot of the communication that happens of people who really don't want people to fight for their own rights or do these kinds of things or protect the environment, they want to have high cynicism and they benefit from that. That when we feel a loss of agency and we just give up, then they win. And so advocates have to do a couple of things. One, you absolutely have to instill hope. And hope is not the same as optimism. Those are two separate things. One is it will work out. Hope is we can make this work out. And the important part of that is the agency. There are things we can do. And that's a super important thing for us to always be saying. The other thing is we have to be very focused on the decline of trust. That actually hurts public interest more than any other side, a decline of trust. And so we ourselves have to do very trustworthy communication. So we have to be careful about the hyperbole and the things that might really help with the algorithms. But if they decline trust even further, you're basically just digging a gigantic hole. So we have to be figuring out ways to be communicating in ways that actually build trust.
And what does that look like? Or then what's your advice to groups in order to encourage that?
I have a lot of different advice for groups. One is that I always tell advocacy groups, if I go to your website and the very first thing it asks me is for money, we're already declining on trust. So you only see me as a bank. You're not giving me things that are about me and motivating me. So that's really important is don't look at me as a bank. Look at me as a little power center and I could go get my together and make a bigger power center and treat me like that. And that's not to say that eventually you won't maybe ask for money, but it's to say don't lead with that. People are like, we don't want to have transactional relationships. And then I go to their homepage and I'm like this. So I think that's really important. It's really important to not be in transactional relationships with people that actually undermines trust in a pretty significant way. The other thing we really have to do is we have to walk our talk. And I think people get confused about when the Obamas say, when they go low, we go high. And everybody's, I'm tired of that. But what we're really saying is we're going to walk our talk. And so I always try and focus on people being in real relationship with folks. I tell campaigners, sometimes I'm in a campaign planning meeting and people will say to me, Kristen, you live out in a rural state. And I'm like, okay, now I got to speak for all rural people. And then they say, why are people voting against their self-interest? And that to me is always a huge flag of, first of all, that's really condescending.
Yeah.
It really is about, you don't understand what their self-interest is. It's not that they don't get it. And so sometimes people come out here around SNAP benefits or things like that. And they're like, you have to tell them, Kristen, that, they're going to cut their SNAP benefits and they want their SNAP benefits and, they need to be fighting for those. I'm like, do you know how mad people are that they're on SNAP in the first place? Like, they don't think the government, they are mad that the government has put in rules and regulations that actually have their families on SNAP. Nobody wants to be on SNAP. So I think it's just really important to be in really respectful relationships with people, especially people who are really different than you, who you have to actually find where your common purpose is. And starting off with, why are you voting against your self-interest is not a great start.
Yeah. It certainly brings the adage, know your audience to mind.
Exactly.
And these days, audience is influence. So you really have to know who you're talking to. And it seems that communications strategy is more complicated now because the audience is much more fragmented and on different platforms that you've really got to be thoughtful about who you're trying to reach for what purpose. What are they going to respond to you? How do you get in front of them? Which I suspect all of this, I don't suspect, I know. A lot of this has to do with the guide, Planning to Win.
Yes.
And I want to circle back to that, but I guess since we're already talking about communications, one other thing I've just been thinking about is we've been seeing a really frightening, I'm not sure if it's trend, effort that seems to be somewhat effective on the part of the Trump administration to basically gain control of major media outlets, either directly, such as helping his friends take over TikTok, or by suing major corporations over what they broadcast in order to get them to comply more readily. What's the term? Preemptive capitulation. As we just saw with the flap between Colbert and CBS because of the FCC's hint that they might go back to equal time. And this is something we've seen in authoritarian countries,
Yes.
Notably Hungary, where the authoritarian in charge gets their friends to take over media outlets that then become more friendly to them. People ask, why does Bezos hang on to the Post when he obviously doesn't care about it? Because its value is as a chit to him. Keeping the Posts in a cage for Donald Trump improves his leverage in other areas where he wants to get something out of the federal government. At least that's my hypothesis. Anyway, what's your take on how are we in a dangerous spiral here of major media companies increasingly willing to change how they cover the news and report on the kinds of things that we're working on because they fear this administration? And how do we deal with that?
It's a really good question. And obviously, yes, I would say I would be worried on a number of fronts. One, yes, this is out of the authoritarian playbook, and we have to acknowledge it. And we have to use all of the legal strategies and other strategies that we have, including consumers and others who have a tremendous amount of power of people who, as you said, pre-obey. We've certainly seen a huge backlash when Jimmy Fallon was censured. And what it does, though, is it wakes people up to say, we're not okay with that. And they certainly heard about it. They backed off of it. The other thing I would say, though, in addition to Donald Trump, is it's actually not just the authoritarian playbook. It's also, and this has been for a long time, right? These media outlets are owned by corporations and they're not independent
Yeah.
sources of journalism anymore. And they haven't been for quite some time. It's not just a Trump administration phenomenon. You also just have, when you look at Meta or you look at TikTok and who owns them, these are corporations who, I always love that saying when someone said, if you don't know what the product is, you.
Yep.
And so we have to understand that they are there to manipulate our reality for their own profit. And so that's a really different thing than I know what my diet of independent journalism is if I'm truly trying to get informed in the world. And that's on us too, that we have to be media literate, which is this a trustworthy outlet for us. But I would just say, I don't think that people are watching what Bezos is doing, for example, at the Washington Post, and they're like, oh, we're all good with that. I think a lot of people are like, oh, that's one more piece of propaganda. I'll have to go research and look at things. And again, what we do have, though, unlike probably when you and I came up in these businesses, is what used to take me hours after I shot footage and then had to go to an Avid studio and then I had to edit something, right? And then I could get it out maybe in a week if I really,
Yep.
really thought about it. And
Yep.
it's like, we could actually, in lightning fast speed, also, you look at Minnesota and it showed up, and a lot of the mainstream media was not covering what was happening in Minnesota. But what you had was a lot of independent journalists going out, and you had a lot of people who are sharing through their social networks. And so it's not so easy to go and occupy a city because we have all of these technologies also at our fingertips for storytelling.
I want to talk about the planning guide because we're talking about all these changes and the guide is about how to win in this current environment. What prompted you to write it and for Spitfire to put it out now?
This is actually an updated guide. So a number of years ago, the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation asked me to go out and talk to different good campaigners about, we actually called the Just Enough Planning Guide. Because a lot of the times you either have people on the back of a napkin, like this is my campaign, or it's like this unbelievable tome that you have to go through. And literally by the time you're done with your campaign plan, it's like the entire world changed.
Yep.
And
Yep.
so we wanted to come back and visit it and say, okay, how do we make sure that people can be pretty dynamic in this environment? So again, I always look at crises often open up opportunities for change. So again, I would not like what happened to USAID to happen in the way it happened. At the same time, I don't know that USAID was doing the best global development ever. I certainly ran campaigns against how they were doing things sometimes. So then the question is, okay, if you have this opportunity, which is I can sit here and be hospice to the old ways, and I can make sure it gets let down easily, or I can start to turn and say, okay, what are my campaigns to have really strong, super effective, low waste, fraud, and abuse global development? Okay, let's go look there. And I want to be the doula for the new way. So we wanted to provide a guide that gave you a good opportunity to say, you can follow these steps and it's going to give you the rigor so you'll know this is an important campaign and we've got a good idea of how to get to a win. And it's built in a way that allows you to be dynamic, which is in today's world.
If you're pitching the guide to somebody, like, what do you generally say about this will help you with this, or here's how this can help you get this to work better?
Exactly. So I say to people, look, if you can tell me this is a win I want to post, then I can walk you through this guide, or you could walk yourself through this guide. And in about a half a day, you will have a really good idea of how to actually achieve that win. So it's not super complicated. It's the information you have now. I do tell people, get the right people around the room. You really have to have smart people who have the expertise in each of the areas that you need. And I also tell people, have a few people at the table who are your hard truth squad, who are going to say, this doesn't make sense.
Your BS testers.
Yeah, your BS testers. You know, you definitely need those people. So you're building, and they're vetting. And you can relatively quickly, though, come up with a really good way forward. I find that without a guide like that, we tend to, first of all, we just always want more perfect information. We're always like, we need to go look at this. We need to analyze this. It's actually your experts. So come together with all your expertise and best case, what do we think? And I think that's really important.
as opposed to getting bogged down in power mapping. What's the name of the senator's dog? And inside dog or out? I really appreciated how in the guide you talk about what's a good team to bring, and especially, yeah, you always want to have some people who will push back and really force you to probe. What are your assumptions? What are your logic links? Does A really go to B and really go to C? And you began that with, if you can name your concrete win. And you talk in the guide, you talk about you have to be able to name a concrete win and the difference between that and just raising awareness.
Exactly.
How do you help organizations move from the raising awareness to defining a concrete win? And why do you think it's hard?
Yeah. I think oftentimes people are thinking like, I need to have the conditions for success. And that is true. People generally need to know, care, and believe something so that they'll motivate. So if you are in a place where if I want to come to you and talk about ALAR and you're like, what's ALAR? You don't even know what it is. You certainly aren't waking up in the morning worried about it. It's probably not the time to go run the ALAR Apple campaign. But when you know, hey, people are really concerned about their health. They're very concerned about chemicals in their food. And in fact, I have a whole power base of MAHA moms who, up until now, like I've worked on plastics in food for 20 years. It's great to have MAHA moms come in and be like, there's plastic in food. I'm like, there is plastic in food. Awesome. You suddenly have this change dynamic. So I think, though, that what people have a hard time doing is really deciding what might be worth it to run a campaign on. And because you're not going to get everything you want. If I just want unbelievably healthy, affordable food, that is going to be a lot of campaigns. But what campaigns do, they're a focusing mechanism, really, in a lot of ways. And it does tell people, like, this is the way it should be. And we're posting our wins to show that. So, like, in the guide, we talked about there's this great campaign that actually took 10 years in New Mexico, but they have government-funded childcare for everybody in that state. And so they had to do a lot of different campaigns to get up to the big win at the ballot. And so you do have to do some raising awareness sometimes to talk about the cost of childcare. And at the same time, you have to tell people, like, we have a solution to this, because sometimes we talk so much about the problems that it starts to become a condition we suffer through as a problem we're going to solve or an opportunity we're going to make happen. So it's super important for people to say, what would get people excited, would be meaningful, gives me a chance to actually do power building. So again, does it give me a chance to go work with businesses? Does it give me a chance to go get together with other people? Because now suddenly my issue, not only am I going to win this campaign, I'm actually being set up for more campaigns in the future because I'm building power that's going to be lasting.
Yeah, that's a really great insight in that using a campaign to create opportunities to grow your allies, your coalitions, to grow the power base. One of the things that you also talk about in the guide is the importance of campaign leadership and investing in a decision maker, the authority of the campaign. And I want to ask about why that's so important, and particularly because I've been in situations where the culture was not supportive of imbuing a hierarchical power to one person. How do you persuade organization leaders that when it comes to campaigns, you really do need to have a poobah at the top who, can make the decisions and doesn't get reversed all the time?
Yeah, I think it's so important to understand, who has visibility on what. And the truth of the matter is, a lot of times when it comes down to it, a lot of us have small pieces and we don't have the full picture. So when it comes time to decide where to deploy resources, or where it comes time to decide like what's really working and what's not working, you do have to have somebody whose job it is to actually look across the entire thing, because any good plan, as soon as you start to implement it, you're going to find different things. Some things aren't going the way you want. Some things are actually going much better. Some things are totally serendipitous. And somebody has to be paying attention to that, because meanwhile, the rest of us can be down. I'm doing my thing and doing to the best of my abilities, but I'm not up on that balcony being able to look out. And I think you need that person who, it's not so much that they're hierarchical and need to tell everybody what to do. It's that they can say, here's what I'm seeing, and this is the way we need to go. And I often talk about people, I say for the groups that as you're doing campaign planning, it's so important to bring in the doers, the ones that you're going to be expecting to actually deploy the campaign in the strategy process, so everybody actually understands what the strategy is, because you have to make decisions. We're going to do this and not that. And people have to understand why that was. So a lot of times people talk to me about their buy-in, like they have buy-in. They actually have to own it. And so what are you doing in your planning process so that people really own the decisions? And then on their own, a lot of times they can make decisions around their piece that are very strategically aligned. But you have to have the person somewhere that is actually looking out there to say what's aligned, what's misaligned. And almost inevitably, if you find a place your campaign's not going well, you're misaligned to the strategy.
You raised the importance of bringing in people and having them be part of the decision making. You talk about that also in the context of community organizations, frontline groups that often get used as storytellers or as examples of the problem, but aren't really invited in to help shape the campaign. What should people know about those kinds of dynamics and how to make them work better?
It's really important when you are thinking about people's lived experience. And a lot of times we're looking at them as like the symbol of the problem we're trying to solve, which is really different than seeing them as actually the problem solver themselves. And so I think that's a real difference in our guide, is having the cultural competency to understand that the people most impacted likely have the best ideas for the solutions that are going to work best. And they also have really good ideas about how to get those solutions in place. And acting like they're going to be the beneficiary of the campaign, but that they are an integral part of your campaign planning team and implementation team. And again, that they're positioned as experts that are problem solvers, not just a problem that we're helping to try and help solve for them.
That makes me wonder, are there examples of campaigns where you've worked where decision to bring in local or frontline leaders as decision makers made a tremendous difference to the viability? I'm sure there are examples of just wondering, one's ready to mind.
Yeah. A great group that, does this on a pretty regular basis with their network is actually Ascend at the Aspen Institute. So Ascend, they actually just released this incredible thing. They have a very large network of state and local leaders who are working to make family prosperity something that is growing, not shrinking in this country. And they work with parents and the kids in their life simultaneously. And they just released Forward with Families. And what I love about it is that it's focused on some really important things that families themselves say are most important, like affordability. But also, what I love about it is they always have parent advisors. Parent advisors are always involved as they develop things. And I think that's so important because it's not that we're going and figuring out what's good for parents. We're actually listening for parents to tell us what's good for them and then designing campaigns around it. And I just think it changes everything when you give them a formal role. It's a role based on expertise, and their real life experience is actually one of the most valuable things when we're out there trying to say what would make life more affordable for families. We actually need to ask that of families. It's not a government report. It's families saying, yes, this is working, or no, this isn't working, right? That's what we need to do. So I think when you, from the get-go, have that as a philosophy, it's just a lot easier. It's not like an afterthought. It's not, oh, I did all the campaign planning and now I'm taking it to the parents. It's literally the parents are sitting there while you're doing this stuff. And it makes a world of difference.
There's another element discussed in the guide, which is thinking about the timing of campaigns. Why now? Is this the right time? Can we win? Can you just talk about how you approach answering those questions?
Yeah. You're really trying to figure out either if a decision is getting made that you can influence or if you're going to have to force a decision, because that's going to be different campaigns. So a great example that we talk about in the guide is like in the Big Beautiful Bill, as it was starting to move, there was a senator who decided he was going to put up all the public lands for sale. And so now that campaign's choosing you. Like if you're a public lands advocate, like you're going. But it was really interesting because what they did, one, it was really good timing. What they did was they put a map up so that everybody understood this is what they're talking about in your specific state. And they connected it to, and this means your recreation, this means your business at the top of it, means all this stuff. So suddenly really fast. And so that's taking really advantage of incredible timing because this window opens. And so to your point of, can you advance everybody's understanding of public lands and what it means to them? Because we talk about the BLM, people are like, the what? But when you suddenly say that place that you'd like to go bike, or that place that you take your kid, or that business that you've launched that you take the tourists out in, that's public lands. And so suddenly they were very successful. And they got actually a bunch of Republican senators to say they're not voting for the whole thing if they didn't pull all that out. And I think that to me is go time and you go. Other times, though, there is no decision. And when people like to avoid decisions. And so sometimes you have to actually force it in. Actually, NRDC did a great campaign recently in Illinois, and two smart things about it. One, it was about transit, and they were talking about cuts to public transit. And what they made it all about was jobs. And they said, if you cut this, I can't get to my job. The entire thing was really based on that. And it's not that it doesn't have climate benefits to your favorite issue. It's not that there weren't other things that were involved in this. But what they really came into was to say, this is about jobs at a time when people are really thinking about jobs. And so they really forced a decision to keep transit because it was a jobs play, which is really different than if it was like public transit for the sake of public transit. They might not have been able to force the decision to the benefit that they did.
Right. I have so many more questions about the guide, but we're also running out of time. So I also just wanted to ask you, what kinds of organizations or what kinds of efforts do you think are most likely to be helped by this guide?
Yeah. I think the greatest thing about this guide right now is for anybody I have an idea for making it better. That this gives you a really good roadmap to be able to sit down with some of your folks and plan it out. And I think right now we need imagination and we need creativity. I had a friend recently say that we're so good at imagination, especially weaponizing it. In other words, how bad could it get? And so this actually gives you how good could it get? Let's look at how good could it get. And what's so interesting is things are shifting, like you just said. Suddenly you had the total wreck people sitting next to the hook and bullet crowd, sitting next to the Chamber of Commerce at all of these gateway cities. Yeah. And you're like, who expected that to happen? But these are weird times, and let's use weird times to our advantage. So what weird thing can you make happen that it wasn't possible before, but suddenly you're like, oh, that's totally possible. And so I love the idea that groups who are saying, because I think, look, you got to block some stuff right now. You got to be out there. You got to be blocking. There's no doubt people are going to be doing civil disobedience. You got to go. So go. And we have to be building. We can't just be against things. We have to be for things, and everybody to get this together, because I think it makes your staff happy to come together and actually plan something that you're for, something proactive. You're not on your back foot all the time. I think it just gives an energy to any group or coalition to feel like, you know what, we actually can set agendas. We can not make noise, but focus attention. And we can actually post wins. And you know what, that makes people more hopeful. And we really need that right now.
Yeah, we certainly do. I think one of the really interesting questions that I think lots of us have to face, particularly on the progressive side, is, well, what shape do we want to come after? He will at some point be out of power, and we will have a chance to build out a government and put policies in place that do, again, move us forward and that help raise people up and help us prosper. I'm just curious for your thoughts on how do you think about how we should think about building up for creating what we want once we're past this time?
Again, I think it gives you an opportunity which you don't always have before. When you have a system in place that you're just trying to work with and you're trying to make it a little bit better, but it might not have been really built for times today. I joke about in COVID, I'm always working to make things easier for families. And a lot of times families actually have to go from 5, 6, 10 different offices to like, go get your WIC benefits over here and go get your housing voucher over here and you have to go in person. Yeah. And if you're not going in person with the same form, you have to actually fax it in. And when COVID happened, there was nobody to go get the faxes. You know what we were able to do? Use the email. And you know what I never did? I never ran a campaign to get the faxes back. And I think we have, what are our faxes that we're like, hey, this is giving us a totally different way. We're getting a waiver for this. So again, I look back at the people in the 70s who did the Clean Water and the Clean Air Act, which they literally created, right? This was never before done, unprecedented, unbelievable, and actually had a pretty good run. And now I'm like, okay, we need that same thinking, because I don't know that how we have it right now is how I would totally regulate for climate. Okay, so if they want to get rid of a bunch of it, again, you might have to go block some of it. But in the meanwhile, it also opens up all of this blank space you didn't have before, which is like eventually people are going to get really tired of really extreme storms and super hot days, and they are going to expect their government. Because right now we're having a conversation about the role of government that we haven't had in a long time. And it's an awesome opportunity to actually shape what do we want for government. Because of all the immigration stuff happening, for the first time, the highest number of people in America via Gallup say 79% say immigration is good for America. You know why? Because they're having to think about it right now. So use these moments to lock in meaning go to town on the solutions we think are really going to work. But to your point is, we can't just be against everything they're doing. People want their lives to get better, and we have to say, what are we saying is the right way? And it has
Right.
to be something that really captures their imagination.
Do you think that just our side does that well? Do we need to get better at painting the vision of what we want and what's good, even just beyond just the current Trump
I
times?
think in a lot of ways, again, the role of government had become kind of tweaking. And people are saying, so on the democracy front, this is a great example of like campaign planning to me at its worst. So when you go and you look and you ask people, a vast majority of people in this country think democracy is the best form of government, but less than a quarter of them think it works well. So when we run all these campaigns for pro-democracy, save democracy, you're totally missing it. It's not that they don't think democracy is a good idea. It's that it's not working for them. So if you had the working democracy campaign, you're already on a much better strategic path of actually getting people what they're asking for. But instead, we get focused on getting them to like democracy as a form of government. Like, good news, they already do. But they don't like this, how it's playing out. And yet when we try and motivate them there, when they're like, I need to hear how it's going to work better for me before I go to the street or do anything. Yeah. So we sort of miss those boats sometimes.
Yeah. Which is unfortunate in this case, because I think it is the fact that democracy hasn't been working great that, again, contributed to us being in this situation right now.
Exactly.
That's what Trump took advantage of,
Exactly.
was a lot of people having the sentiment that it's not working right. It's not, I'm not moving forward, I'm falling behind. Kristen, thank you so much for your time. I have so many more questions, but the clock is an unforgiving master. I would love to know, what's some advice that you would like to pass on to up and coming campaigners?
I definitely want them to be for something and not just against something. I just think we need a lot more for campaigns right now than we need against campaigns. And I would also say, I think start every meeting with, let's vent about all of the challenges that are out there. But I often tell people, when we're looking about, I'm going to go run my campaign, what's going on? And people always start, first of all, they always start with headwinds. They always tell me how difficult it's going to be. They always talk about everything's against them. They're under-resourced. They control the media. You did it a little bit earlier in this interview, like all the headwinds, right? And then I say, what are all the tailwinds? What are all the things we do have going for us? And actually, people start to really understand that they have a lot to build on. And I just really encourage people to not get so myopic that, it's all headwinds, because you're not going to see where your best opportunities are, because those are with tailwinds. So get focused on your tailwinds.
Yeah. Kristen, thank you again for your time.
Of
I really
course.
appreciate it. Thanks for tuning into The Campaign Strategist, where we dive into the art and science of advocacy. The podcast is produced by Prismatic Strategies to share wisdom and insights from leaders in the field. I'm your host, Pete Altman. Music was written by Andrea Perry and Pete Altman, and this is edited by Abby Altman. If you enjoyed today's episode, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with others who care about making a difference. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks again, and see you next time.